Order. I call this meeting to order, the hour being 10 a.m. This is the Standing Committee on Community Services. Welcome all. I am the Honourable Susan Corkum-Greek, MLA for Lunenburg, and Chair of this committee. Today we will hear from presenters regarding support and protection for tenants under the Residential Tenancies Act. I would remind folks to switch your phones to silent or turn them off. God forbid any of us turn our phones off for a couple hours. In case of an emergency, please use the Granville Street exit and walk up to the Grand Parade. Before I ask committee members to introduce themselves, I would just speak to something that is on many of our minds this morning, and that certainly my thoughts, and I suspect all of yours, are with the families, the community, and the searchers in Pictou County who are still out there looking for those children. So I will now ask committee members to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Good morning, Chair. Brad McGowan, MLA for Cole Harbour Dartmouth and Vice Chair of the committee.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Damien Stoylov from Bedford South.
Good morning, Julie Van Exen, MLA for King South.
Good morning, thanks for being here. My name's Kyle McQuarrie, and I'm the MLA for Inverness.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Susie Hanson, the MLA for Halifax-Mainland.
Good morning, Rod Wilson, Halifax-Armdale.
Ian Rankin, Timberley Prospect.
Thank you. I'd also like to note the presence of Legislative Counsel Aaron Fowler and Legislative Committee Clerk Tamer Nusaba. Again, the topic today is support and protection for tenants under the Residential Tenancies Act. We welcome our witnesses this morning, and I would ask each of you to please introduce yourselves, after which we'll double back for opening comments, and we will begin with Mr. Culligan, please.
Good morning. My name is Mark Culligan, and I'm a community legal worker with the Dalhousie Legal Aid Service.
Hello, Rodger, Gregg, Service Nova Scotia, Executive Director of Business and Consumer Services.
Good morning, Gary O'Toole. I'm Associate Deputy Minister for Service Nova Scotia.
Good morning, I'm Melissa Mosher, Director of Consumer Programs and Director of Residential Tenancies.
Good morning, Heather Clark, Chairperson of Nova Scotia ACORN, Halifax-Mainland Chapter.
Good morning, I'm Nora Macintosh, Staff Lawyer with Nova Scotia Legal Aid Social Justice Office.
Thank you, and I understand there will be some opening remarks by 4 of the individuals. Again, if we could begin with Mr. Culligan.
Thank you. As a community legal worker, I provide legal services to low-income people in a variety of areas, including residential tenancies. My message for the committee today is this: urgent action is needed to protect tenants' rights. Canada has committed under international law and the National Housing Strategy Act to the progressive realization of the right to housing. For tenants, that includes the rights to affordable, stable, accessible, and good quality housing. Tenants' rights have been eroded over the last decade by market conditions and regulatory failures. Vacancy rates fell below healthy levels in 2015-2016 for the HRM and in 2020 for the rest of Nova Scotia. Upward pressures on rent and a speculative frenzy followed, with dire results. The average price of a rental unit in Nova Scotia is now $1,550 per month. While the rent cap controls price increases for long-term tenants, rents now increase by an average of 28% whenever units turn over. These conditions means that tenants have limited consumer power, and landlords are incentivized to evict long-term tenants. The most urgent requirement for the government is to close the fixed-term lease loophole. Tenants have no right to renew this type of temporary lease and are not entitled to any notice from their landlord if they choose not to renew. Fixed-term leases effectively grant landlords the power to sidestep formal eviction procedures and retaliate against tenants who exercise their rights. Nova Scotia is almost the only province in all of Canada to have both a system of rent control and unrestricted fixed-term leases. The next most urgent need is the creation of a compliance and enforcement unit. Unlike other provinces, Nova Scotia does not allow for the issuance of administrative fines, general damages, or other punishments for bad actors who repeatedly or egregiously break the rules. As a result, bad actors are emboldened to charge illegal fees, to refuse to make necessary repairs, and to engage in unlawful eviction tactics. To illustrate these problems, I want to tell you about one of my clients, Ms. Belinda Marsman. Ms. Marsman moved into a rental unit in Dartmouth North on a periodic lease in 2014. She receives income assistance and has few choices for affordable rental units. Her building was purchased by AMK Barrett in July 2023. The next month, a representative of the landlord went around her building asking tenants to sign new leases. He told her that the landlord just wanted to update the contact information on the lease and that the other terms would remain the same. Ms. Marsman signed it and did not think anything else about it until she received a notice of non-renewal in June of 2024. The notice said that her fixed-term lease would expire on August 31st, less than 3 months later. No reason was given for the non-renewal. Ms. Marsman made an application to set aside the fixed-term lease in July 2024 with the help of her MLA's office and Dalhousie Legal Aid. When confronted by the legal action, the landlord agreed to switch the tenancy back to a periodic lease. This story should be shocking. AMK Barrett is a large landlord who is on a purchasing spree. The landlord clearly abused fixed-term leases to undermine the security of tenure of a vulnerable tenant. Ms. Marsman was brave and resourceful and managed to fight back. But there are no consequences for AMK Barrett. How many other tenants have they done this to? How many other tenants will they do this to? And unfortunately, this is not the end of the story. AMK Barrett replaced all the windows in Ms. Marsman's unit in the fall of 2023. They only half completed the job and did not replace the window trim. The insulation was left exposed with jagged edges and metal protrusions. It was unsafe for Ms. Marsman's grandchildren to be in the unit. Ms. Marsman complained, but was assured that the repairs would be finished. In the meantime, the windows leaked, the apartment became drafty, and the drywall began to crumble. Ms. Marsman decided not to take legal action, though, until her lease issue was resolved, out of fear that if she made a complaint, the landlord would not renew her lease. The reality is that tenants on fixed-term leases are usually too vulnerable to insist on these kinds of repairs. Once her lease was restored, however, Ms. Marsman made a claim to residential tenancies. The landlord took the position that the repairs were cosmetic, and later that her expectations should be tempered by her low rent. An order granting repairs and a $1,500 rent abatement was issued, and it found, among other things, that it is clear that the landlord would never address these issues unless forced to comply. Ms. Marsman's story demonstrates what happens when government enables bad actors and housing predators. Landlords are incentivized to evict tenants. Tenants have a limited real-world ability to fight back or to leave unsafe rental conditions, and landlords break the rules because they are not afraid to get caught. I implore upon you to take immediate action to restore balance to the Residential Tenancies Act and the rental market and to address these abuses, all of which is respectfully submitted. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we'll have opening comments from ADM O'Toole, please.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee, fellow witnesses. I'd like to start by thanking the committee for the opportunity and the invitation to join you today to talk about protections and supports for tenants under the Residential Tenancies Act. With about a third of all households rented in Nova Scotia, the Residential Tenancies program is one that supports thousands of Nova Scotians every year. It's a program that's ever evolving, always taking into consideration the needs and interests of both tenants and landlords. Madam Chair, hundreds of thousands of people across the province live in homes rented from landlords. There are tenants who rent apartments from landlords in downtown Halifax and tenants who rent single rooms from landlords in rural parts of the province. Our job is to provide a residential tenancies program that supports all of them. The program establishes minimum rules tenants and landlords must follow and provides for dispute resolution where tenants and landlords cannot agree on solutions. Today, we're here to talk about protections and supports specifically for tenants under the Residential Tenancies Act. And I welcome the opportunity to speak with you about the initiatives we've taken, including extending the temporary rent cap, prohibiting different rental amounts for different rental terms, strengthening protections against evictions for renovations, making it easier for tenants to get their security deposits back and reducing wait times for hearings. The work we do is part of a larger picture of housing, which I believe important to discuss and mention here. While our job at Service Nova Scotia is to oversee the residential tenancies program, other supports across government include rent supplements for tenants who need help to pay their rent, as well as many provincially funded community-based programs that offer diversion funding to also help tenants. Housing Nova Scotia and the Nova Scotia Provincial Housing Agency are working to build more affordable housing, and creating more housing so tenants have more choice is critical to the residential tenancies work that we manage. More choice means tenants have more options when they find themselves in a tenancy that is not suited to their needs. You often hear Minister Balzer speak of the need to balance the interests of tenants and landlords. It's a message we often use, and while it can get repetitive, it's the core of what we do. Tenants and landlords both have roles and responsibilities to help ensure a successful tenancy. Tenants and landlords. Tenants need landlords to provide them a safe and well-maintained place to live at a rent they can afford, and landlords, both big and small, need tenants to pay rent to help manage costs associated with ongoing maintenance, taxes, and insurance. Our job is to be sure that when there is a dispute, the residential tenancies program is there to support both tenants and landlords. A good example of this balance is the rent cap. Landlords want the rent cap removed, and tenants want a lower rent cap. The rent cap is a temporary solution to help keep housing affordable for tenants while we increase housing supply. But we also need to make sure that landlords can maintain the current housing supply. We need to balance landlords' rising expenses with tenants' need for rent stability. It is indeed a balance, and it's a delicate one. And this is not a job that we do alone. We meet with organizations like those present here today, ACORN, Dalhousie Legal Aid, Nova Scotia Legal Aid, and the rental housing providers of Nova Scotia to help inform the work that we do. Together, with their input, we look to see how the program can improve, and we value that input and see it as critical to the work that we do every day. There's been a lot of discussion in recent years about the need for a compliance and enforcement unit. The department commissioned a report to identify what such a unit may look like should it be established. We wanted to be sure it was the right step to take and truly help tenants and landlords before we hired a team and spent $1 million, which would have been the initial startup costs. Through the work we did with the consultant, we came to understand that an enforcement unit would not achieve what many thought it would. For example, if a landlord didn't fix a shower, an enforcement unit wouldn't help with that. It also wouldn't help with forcing a tenant to leave when evicted. This gave us reason to go in another direction as we continue monitoring the program, instead focusing on process and program improvements that have meaningful impact. For example, triaging more urgent cases and keeping wait times low. We have among the best wait times in the country. Wait times in some provinces can be as high as 6 months, and that's with a compliance and enforcement unit. Just last week, more changes to the Residential Tenancies Act and regulations came into effect that will help tenants manage more difficult situations sooner and help improve communication between tenants and landlords. I look forward to explaining this more this morning. Madam Chair, in closing, the team at Service Nova Scotia is working hard to protect and support tenants, and we look forward to this morning's meeting to discuss all the work underway. Thank you.
Thank you. And Ms. Clark, please.
Good morning, Madam Chair. My name is Heather Clark. I'm the chair of Nova Scotia ACORN Mainland chapter. I'm also a retired grandmother living on a fixed-term lease in Halifax. Like a lot of seniors, I decided to rent in my retirement while living on a fixed income to better hedge my monthly expenses. But with renting in Nova Scotia, that has all changed. Living on a fixed-term lease has been detrimental to my physical and mental health. I live in a building with 129 units. When I moved in, the building was new. Today, the building has fallen to disrepair due to lack of maintenance against the M200 bylaws. The windows leak, it floods constantly in units and outside units. The fire system is faulty and the ventilation has been cut off. It is dirty, needs painting, and the carpets are disgraceful, and the building is full of cockroaches. Tenants are bullied, threatened eviction, and emails from the resident manager and property manager are hostile. I feel like a prisoner in my own home. Recently, on December 23, 2024, the sprinkler system on the 3rd floor broke in the hallway and flooded the 3rd and 2nd floor. They tried to evict a single mother over Christmas and requested tenants use their own tenant insurance for repairs inside their units while the flood was in the hallway. While you were enjoying family over the holiday, I was trying to stay dry, chasing cockroaches, all the while recovering from recent breast cancer surgery. Shortly after, there was contaminated water pouring into the parking garage for 4 days. They continuously change rules to suit them, costing tenants money. They are also reducing services used to attract me to sign the lease in 2014. I have provided a list, but in the interest of time, you can read that at your own leisure. As an ACORN chair, I hear daily abuse like this. Most recently, a federal MP candidate of the PC party called me from a constituent's home while canvassing. A senior couple, the spouse in a wheelchair, were being evicted at no fault on a fixed-term lease. The landlord was increasing the rent by $500 a month, according to the resident manager. She was crying on the phone and requesting help. When is this government in power going to stop this type of abuse of its citizens? The Nova Scotia ACORN fixed-term lease report shows an increase of 466% since 2021 of tenants being evicted on a fixed-term lease while being good tenants and paying rent on time. 35.7% were evicted more than once, and 1 in 5 ended up unhoused. Only 2 out of 243 people on a fixed-term lease needed a short-term rental. The remainder wanted long-term accommodations, which the fixed-term lease does not provide. A recent conversation with the resident manager uncovered that leasing agents who find rentals for tenants get paid a higher commission if they get the tenant to sign a fixed-term lease. Leasing agents are not regulated in Nova Scotia. In my opinion, this is tide selling. The recent changes to refunding the damage deposit now means tenants will have to wait longer for refunds and fight to get them back. I hear constantly that tenants are being charged for normal wear and tear. This needs to be monitored and published for those in bad faith. Halifax continues to have the lowest apartment completions in the country, according to the CMHC Housing Report in 2023. Builders are using condo specs to build apartments, which can be converted and sold as condos down the road, once again controlling the narrative, all the while obtaining federal funding, money, taxpayer money. The extended rent cap of 5% equates to 26.7% increase in rents over 5 years for people who have had stable rental properties. Tenants cannot afford that, and low-income tenants now have to resort to food banks and other social programs. The new 3-day eviction down from 15 will increase homelessness and must be closely monitored. A rent bank must be set up to avoid evictions. Imagine a single mother with a sick child that needs medical help or medications. She does not pay her rent and gets evicted. Family services step in to keep the child off the streets. That is more costly than a rent bank. According to Stats Canada, in 2024, up to 61% of low-income renters are struggling with housing affordability, and 57% of people with disabilities can't meet monthly expenses. Canada has nearly 3.5% in social housing, and in Nova Scotia it is disappearing at an alarming rate. To intensify the issue, there is a massive lack of repairs and adequate government response to this. The financialization of housing now controls 20 to 30% of the rental market. ACORN's national survey showed 80% need urgent repairs and 43% have past issues. These were our demands. ACORN is demanding a permanent rent control at a more reasonable rate, tying the rent to the unit. We are demanding a lease structure that gives tenants security of tenure and rent increases. A ban on fixed-term leases for those requiring a rental longer than 12 months. As part of the stimulus package, we are demanding a large increase to social housing with rent set at 30% of before tax income. Today's wait time is 10 to 15 years in Nova Scotia for social housing. Federal funding should go to core housing needs first and affordable in perpetuity, no more 20-year leases. We've seen that in Nova Scotia just recently, where the leases have expired and the folks have no place to go. REITs should be required to convert 20% of their units to affordable housing within 3 years or at time of construction, and federal funding for those who do not. And federal funding for corporate landlords who do not have affordable units. And track and publish displacement criteria to penalize offenders. Thank you.
Thank you. And now, Ms. Macintosh, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the challenges that tenants are facing in Nova Scotia. For those of you who don't know, the Social Justice Office provides a range of legal services from advice to full-service representation to low-income individuals in the HRM. But the majority of the clients that we serve have issues that fall under the Residential Tenancies Act. Since the Social Justice Office opened in 2018, the number of requests that we receive for help with housing has been steadily increasing. In 2018, we received 203 applications for housing help. In 2024, we received 505 applications for housing help, a 149% increase. In our view, the number of applications from tenants that we receive each year directly reflects the housing crisis in Nova Scotia. The increasing demand in our services has far outpaced the resources available to meet it, leading to heavier caseloads, longer wait times, and limited capacity to provide the in-depth support that many clients urgently need. As a result, we prioritize representing tenants who are facing eviction hearings. Staff at my office have observed an increase in legal complexity, novel issues, and emotional intensity of the matters that are involved. We are seeing more tenancy-related appeals reach the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia, and we are spending significantly more time on each full-service housing file. These trends reflect a broader shift in the legal landscape. The framework governing tenancies in Nova Scotia is changing rapidly. While some of these changes are intended to create greater efficiency, they're unfolding in a context where tenants are already overwhelmed, under-resourced, and struggling to navigate their rights. The result is a growing disparity between the needs of tenants and the capacity of the legal system to support them. This leaves tenants at a distinct disadvantage in a system that already leans heavily towards property owners. We've seen this imbalance deepen with recent changes, in particular the shortened eviction timeline for rental arrears. Before, tenants had just over 4 weeks to make a plan to deal with their arrears. Now they have less than 2. That timeline might not even bridge the gap between paychecks, especially for tenants who are on fixed incomes or have precarious employment. If a tenant doesn't respond to a notice to quit for rental arrears in time, even if they didn't understand the notice or they weren't able to read it, they're deemed to have accepted their eviction. The result is that tenants can lose their housing not because of the severity of what they have done, but because they missed a deadline. That kind of consequence is disproportionate to the problem of late rent. Making evictions for rental arrears faster will lead to more evictions, more homelessness, and more strain on the courts. Tenants facing sudden eviction may have no choice but to turn to other services to survive, and we know that people will go without heat, without power, without medication. They may skip meals to make rent. It makes no sense to impose tighter deadlines and greater financial barriers on people who are already struggling to pay the rent. This approach doesn't support housing stability, it undermines it. In a news release from September 2024, Service Nova Scotia justified this change by saying the shortened timeline brings us in line with other provinces. I'd ask this committee to consider using that same reasoning to address a more long-standing gap in tenant protections that has garnered a lot of attention in recent years, the issue with fixed-term leases. Nova Scotia is one of the only jurisdictions in the country where fixed-term leases can simply end with no reason, no notice, and no right to renew. If we're aligning with other provinces on eviction timelines, why not also align with them on the right of tenants to stay in their homes? We are seeing landlords increasingly use fixed-term leases to sidestep rent control and displace tenants. Many of our clients are being pushed into fixed-term leases after having already built security of tenure on periodic leases. This used to be rare, something tenant-initiated or used as a probationary period. But now we're seeing entire buildings of tenants where landlords will only offer fixed-term leases. And when the term ends, even good tenants are not safe. There's no incentive for landlords to renew when they can raise the rent for a new incoming tenant. Meanwhile, tenants are increasingly afraid to raise repair issues or challenge illegal practices for fear of losing their housing. And when tenants can't rely on landlords to do the right thing, the government must step in to protect them. The Residential Tenancies Program is one of the few legal tools that tenants have to defend their rights and their homes, but it must evolve to meet this moment. We cannot solve a housing crisis by making life harder for the people most vulnerable to it, nor can we justify public harm in service of private profit. Nova Scotians need strong, fair, and accessible tenant protections. I hope this committee will consider how the current gaps are contributing not just to legal hardship, but to housing instability and homelessness in Nova Scotia. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and again to all of our witnesses for being with us today. We are going to move into opening the floor to questions. I will remind everyone to please wait for your name and so that you can be recognized, so that we can give the folks at Ledge TV the time to turn on your microphone. We'll start the first round of questions with the NDP Caucus with 20 minutes, followed by the Liberals for 10 minutes and the PCs for 30 minutes. At the end of that time, we'll see what timing remains, and we'll divide it between the speakers for additional time. So I would recognize MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentations. I'm going to start off with Service Nova Scotia. Last spring, the federal government put forward a Renters' Bill of Rights. It provides a basic framework for enhancing tenants' rights and protecting tenure security. Does the department endorse this Bill of Rights?
ADM O'Toole.
Certainly, we were involved in some of the discussions around the Bill of Rights, and we're aware of it. I'll stop short of saying we endorse it, but we're certainly aware that there's a Bill of Rights that exists. We would adopt any part of that is part of our regulatory framework and part of our program. And we're always looking to improve the program, as I mentioned in my opening remarks. I don't know if Melissa or Rodger have anything to add to my comments.
Ms. Mosher, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, so we had discussions regarding the Renters' Bill of Rights, and so there were some. It's changed a bit since then, but there were some items that that Nova Scotia does align with that are already in that charter, and others that weren't. So, some of the things, for example, were a written lease. So Nova Scotia has a written lease. I'm trying to think now what some of the other ones were. So, but the requirements to meet those needs have changed. What they were being introduced from the federal government, they aren't as strict as they were last fall when it kind of was introduced. So I'm not sure what has. So it's just changed a little bit. But yes, we have worked towards and looked towards improving the program as we can.
MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And I'm glad that there was discussions made. We know that things are changing, and we hear it every day on the floor and in our offices. But the endorsement of Renters' Bill of Rights is one of the conditions that provinces have met in order to be eligible for the Canadian Housing Infrastructure Fund. Is your department willing to take this step to unlock the $170 million for housing development that we are eligible for this through this program?
ADM O'Toole.
So as my colleague mentioned, some of the requirements around meeting parts of that Bill of Rights in order to be eligible for funding, those are the elements that have changed. And I'm sorry, I'm not entirely up to speed on exactly what those elements were or how they've changed, but I know the requirement to meet certain elements of the Bill of Rights have changed, and there's no longer a requirement for that to be eligible for the funding. And we were in discussions with other departments provincially around that last fall. And I'm sorry, I can't provide you with a more robust update other than we know the requirements have changed and the eligibility for the funding has changed as well.
MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we are one of the only 4 provinces that have not signed the Canadian Housing Infrastructure Fund agreements, and you're saying that there have been some changes. Has your department been involved in the negotiations? What is the biggest barrier to getting this deal signed?
ADM O'Toole.
So that would be a housing lead. We wouldn't be the department that would be the lead negotiator in those discussions.
MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I do understand that it is a part of housing, but as well, these are the things that we hear often on this floor, that we're working cross departments, working together with other departments, and housing is one of those pieces that also tie into residential tenancy. So I ask that question because this is an opportunity to be able to, put forward this information so that we can actually access this fund for structures, for infrastructure funding, so so that we can actually build more housing, is what this government continues to say. So I truly appreciate the answer, but I mean, there's a lot that we still have to do to get housing built, and this is one of those things. My next question is for Dalhousie Legal Aid. Time and time again, we hear from this government that there needs to be a balance in tenant and landlord relations. Mr. Culligan, you have a long history of working with tenants, and we've been in contact multiple times through our office. And you absolutely do an amazing job. You've been working with tenants in the Residential Tenancies Act very closely. So I'd like to start by asking a simple yes or no question, and you can elaborate on it after you give the answer. But in your view, are recent changes to this act, like sped up evictions and the extension of the 5% rent cap, striking a fair balance between landlords and tenants?
Mr. Culligan.
Thank you. I'd like to start off to answer that question by addressing the recent changes to the eviction timelines. The shortened timelines are going to have the effect of punishing tenants who are low income for the housing crisis. Rents have skyrocketed. They're unaffordable for most households. And now we are going to hold tenants to a standard that isn't, that we don't hold other citizens to. When we, if you think about Nova Scotia Power and what the process for disconnection looks like if you're behind on rent, there's multiple notices, there's options for, there's regulated framework for entering into repayment plans. There's a process for working with tenants and for people who are struggling over a timeline, and that's not what we're seeing here. We're seeing very harsh consequences that have the effect of uprooting families, destabilizing communities, and having long-term consequences. And it's also not clear that that there's any need for these shortened eviction timelines. We've heard today that the province has done quite a good work in reducing the timeline between an application and a hearing. That's excellent, but that's had much, that's addressed a lot of the problems with the timelines. And I think the public discussion around this has been really influenced by headlines out of places like Ontario, where there's a really dysfunctional system, where it's taking years for cases to go through the system. But that's just not the case here. Dalhousie Legal Aid looked at about 481 eviction decisions in 2021, and what we saw there is that the timeline between an application and a decision was about 70 days, which is relatively quick. So there's just no clear rationale, like why at this time is it necessary to move forward with these eviction timelines when we're in a housing crisis and possibly on the verge of a recession. So we, in terms of a balance, the government came forward with that in the fall. To the benefit of landlords, but we didn't see anything significant for tenants. We saw the extension of the current rent cap at a rate that's higher than the inflation rate. And what we didn't see is any action on the core issues affecting tenants, in particular fixed-term leases. There are really three pillars to security of tenure. So that's the right of tenants to live in a stable, long-term housing. That's just cause protection from evictions, that's rent control, and that's restrictions on fixed-term leases. And without those three pillars in place, we are eroding the basis for tenant stability. Thank you.
MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm also going to ask Nova Scotia Legal Aid a similar question. Previously, landlords could not file to evict the tenant for non-payment of rent until the tenant was 15 days late. Now, as of April 30th, landlords can begin the eviction process just after 3 days, which was spoken here within the few minutes we've been here. Can you walk us through how this sped-up process is going to impact tenants who are faced with rapidly rising rental costs? So I've heard from Mr. Mark Culligan, and I'd like to, hear your perspective based on what you're hearing from clients on what this looks like for folks.
Ms. Macintosh.
Thank you. From our perspective, the primary concerns that we've been discussing at my office is that we are going to see more tenants evicted because they are unable to come up with a plan in that short time frame. 3 days is not very much time for anybody to come up with arrears, let alone make efforts to inform themselves of their rights and then take steps to actually take action on those rights as well. In particular for folks who have families, who have full-time jobs, who otherwise have occupations that require them to be present for other things during that time period. Historically, at my office, some of the more urgent matters that we deal with are situations in which somebody receives a Form D, which is a notice to quit for rental arrears, and they urgently have to address it in some way, whether by paying those arrears, filing a Form J with the tenancy program, or accepting the termination of tenancy. Because of the deeming provision in the Tenancies Act, which states that if a tenant doesn't respond to a notice to quit for rental arrears, they're essentially deemed to have accepted that tenancy, means that folks who don't have time to ascertain what their rights are and make a plan will be deemed to have accepted that termination of tenancy. And so alongside folks who will be evicted simply by the fact that they're unable to come up with those arrears in that short period of time, we're also going to see more of that, those deemed terminations of tenancy due to the fact that folks can't learn about and act on their rights within that short time frame.
MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Culligan, you released data showing, on average, what late payment of rent looks like in our province. In most cases, tenants were only behind by a little more than 1 month's rent. Given this, were there better options that the government could have used to address the problem?
Mr. Culligan. Oh, we're a little slow on the mic there. Mr. Culligan.
Thank you. In 2022, our office obtained through the small claims court in Halifax and the courts of Nova Scotia about 481 residential tenancies decisions that have been converted into orders of the director, mostly for the purposes of enforcement. The vast majority of these were eviction decisions, so claims for eviction on the basis of rental arrears. The amount of the arrears that we saw in those decisions, again, this is from the 2021 calendar year, was a little over the median amount was a little over 2,000, which when we compared that against the monthly rental amount was about a little over 2 months' rent. So it was about 2 to 3 months worth of rent. So it was a relatively, it's $2,000 is not nothing, but that's a relatively small sum when you're thinking about the incomes of a business owner, especially when you reflect on the number of landlords who are corporate entities. Over half of the decision we saw were on behalf of corporate entities, and so that data is relatively consistent with what other researchers were finding at around that time. It's when tenants are being evicted on rental arrears, most of the studies in Canada are showing about 2 to 3 months worth of rent. I'm not sure what that looks like now. And frankly, I would love to see some data released on this. We had to comb through that data and enter it by hand in a spreadsheet. But you'd think that we'd have evidence-based policymaking here, where when we're changing legislation that has like a social impact, we'd be basing that on empirical changes in the market that you're regulating. So, you know, the province is expediting the timelines for evictions. Is there a clear need for that? Is there something that's changed that's slowed down eviction? I don't think so. Is there, you know, a dramatic increase in the amounts that tenants are owing when they're being evicted? I haven't seen any data to support that, and it's really difficult to do that kind of research. Thanks.
MLA Hansen.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to ask a question to ACORN. CMHC reported that new tenants saw rental increases on average of 28%, and that was a part of the conversation, your presentation. And last year, despite it was 28% last year, despite this province's 5% rent cap. The numbers don't actually compute to be equal. So Ms. Clark, can you explain how the fixed term lease loophole is being used by landlords to undermine the government's rent cap, and how often are you seeing this happen?
I recognize Ms. Clark.
Thank you. So the fixed term lease, basically it states right in the lease that the lease is only good for 12 months. It's not the same as a periodic lease. And the challenges are that seniors who have maybe sold their home, done their financial planning, sold their home, wanted to rent, maybe travel in the wintertime, whatever they wanted to do, you know, which is a very common financial planning advice that people give, and or things that people want to do when they're retiring. They go into this lease assuming that it's going to be what used to be offered 20, 30 years ago, not realizing that the fixed term lease was put in place for short-term rentals, for students, for vacation properties, Airbnbs and things like that. It was meant, originally set up and meant for 12 months and shorter. Over the time period, someone has figured out that you can use it for long-term rentals. But the general public doesn't realize that. They're not realizing that the lease has changed. And yes, it is right on the lease. It happened to me. It happened to me. And I didn't realize that there was a little box hidden at the bottom of the lease that says fixed term lease or periodic lease. And then by the time I realized it, it says you must vacate within 12 months. Now, I got lucky. I haven't been asked to leave, but many people are. In my unit that I rent in right now, you know, I've been under so much stress and having so many health issues, I just don't have the energy to move for one thing. I don't have the cost to move, the money to move for another thing. But every year, I'm expecting to get evicted because the same unit in my building rents for $1,000 more a month, if you can imagine that, in a building that's filled with cockroaches. And the fire alarms go off 4 times in one night. And new Canadians are vacating with small children and babies down a stairwell that the lighting is insufficient and there's not enough hand railings. And people are being flooded out of their apartments and expected to pay the expenses. And it just goes on and on and on. So it's given the landlord the opportunity to take advantage of the tenants because they know they have no place to go. And I hear it daily, it's happening to me, and you know, this province should be ashamed of themselves, taking advantage of your most vulnerable citizens, new Canadians, students, seniors, marginalized people. It just goes on and on and on. Your most vulnerable population is being displaced, and no one's doing anything about it.
MLA Hansen with a little over 2.5 minutes in this segment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for that. I know that, you know, because we hear it all the time in our office about the fixed term lease loophole or the fixed term leases. We call it a loophole because folks are calling us nonstop to reach out to both legal aid offices to be able to halt the evictions or, you know, have a breath of fresh air to be able to figure out what this is looking like. So you spoke to the fixed term lease loophole. I wanted to ask, and this will also be to legal aids, is it resulting in more evictions? And to your knowledge, are any of these evictions resulting in homelessness?
Ms. Macintosh, sorry, I'm not sure who that was directed to. Sorry, to Ms. Clark then.
Thank you. One of the things I did point out is I think the statistics show in our fixed-term lease report that evictions went up 466% since people started being evicted on fixed-term leases, and several people had moved, been evicted more than once, and 1 in 5 of those people have been left unhoused and living on the streets. And I have personal experience with that. I have a friend, my best friend, her 34-year-old nephew died on the streets of Halifax in December, just before the Christmas holiday. He was homeless and he had no place to go, was diabetic, ended up in the hospital and died. Another family member of hers who is terminally ill was evicted because of his building was sold. And he was put in this apartment in Dartmouth by the Department of Community Services. He was given this apartment as low-income housing. He's terminally ill, and he was evicted from that apartment when the building sold. He's 55 years old, and they're putting him in a nursing home. That's just, to me, disgraceful. I don't know if that answers your questions, but I have too many examples.
MLA Hanson, you've got about 4 seconds.
I just want to say thank you, and when we revisit, I'll get back to the question. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to move on to the time allotted to the Liberal Party, and I'll recognize MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Relative to the discussion on fixed leases, we're hearing a lot of testimony today, some anecdotal, but some concrete data, and it seems clear to me that fixed-term leases are increasingly being used to avoid the rent cap. So I'd like to direct my questions at Department of Service Nova Scotia. Do you accept that the fixed-term leases are intentionally used by landlords? And if so, what steps is the department taking to address this issue?
Sorry, turned myself off. ADM O'Toole, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Certainly, we're aware anecdotally through our conversations with landlords and tenants that fixed-term leases are being used inappropriately. We know that fixed-term leases have been around for decades and have been part of the Residential Tenancies Act for a very long time. And we also know that the stories that we're hearing here today. We've heard some of those stories too about fixed-term leases being used inappropriately in rental situations. And so, in my opening remarks, I referred to the fact that we take balance very seriously. And certainly this is one of those issues where we know that there is value in fixed-term leases in certain circumstances. We know that they help some tenant-landlord situations where someone is here temporarily for work or student housing or any number of other situations where a fixed-term lease is appropriate and can help a tenant. And so before we we remove that, we need to consider what are the unintended impacts of removing that provision in the Act or the allowance of fixed-term leases in the Act. And certainly, when we look at inflationary costs, we look at the vacancy rate in the province. We know that these are exacerbating factors that will likely change with time, and we're seeing that now. So we're seeing a vacancy rate starting to rise, and we're seeing things in the rental market that we haven't seen in quite a long time. Ads for free first month's rent, for example. And so before we make changes to provisions in an act, we need to understand what the long-term consequences of doing that are. And so, I'll pause there and offer my colleagues an opportunity to comment on fixed-term leases as well.
Mr. Gregg.
Yeah, so, the bigger challenge we'd all recognize, we are in a housing crisis, and we have been for a number of years, and we're taking a lot of steps to try to address that, and we're starting to see progress. So in response, rent cap was introduced a number of years ago, and that was, it's temporary in its name. It's the Interim Rent Cap Act. So other provinces that do have protections or specific protections for tenants in fixed-term leases, they also have permanent rent control. So we are not a province that has permanent rent control. We have an interim rent cap as we look to build up supply, which, as Mr. O'Toole noted, we're starting to see some results on. So we need to be careful before we jump into additional regulations in a situation that right now we're working through what that is in term. So there are definitely immediate concerns, but if we look at the longer health of the rental market, it would make we have to be careful with what results of rent control can have over an extended period of time. So given those long-term results of rent control, we have to temper that with how we address any response that increases regulations that could affect the market.
MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That's helpful. I was around when the rent cap was started, and I think that this is an unintended consequence of these fixed-term leases being used. But when you hear that the department is using the answer about balance, it seems to be that they're trying to help landlords. So I don't think it can be both. I think it has to be either the fixed-term lease issue is for those short-term students and people that want it for less than a year, or it is to give landlords that out and try to balance out the challenges that landlords are facing. So the data that's been presented today that I find challenging with this is that, and correct me if I'm wrong, it came from ACORN, is that only 2 out of 200 and some fixed-term leases wanted short-term. So I asked the department, do you have data that of this regard to show that this is the case? Because I don't think we can accept as a committee that this is about having fixed-term leases for those short-term circumstances that people that want them, given the data that's presented today. So I asked the department again, what is the purpose of this rent cap, and is there an appetite to review this, given that this, I believe that we can all agree that this is an unintended consequence, but maybe the department has data that they can share with the committee that refutes that point.
ADM O'Toole.
So I'll start by saying that the purpose of the rent cap is to provide temporary relief from unreasonable increases in rent during a time where there is extremely low vacancy and inflationary pressures being experienced. In terms of the data around the program and the type of data holdings we have, I'll refer to my colleague Melissa to maybe provide some insights.
Ms. Mosher.
Thank you. So unfortunately, we do not have statistics of how many fixed-term leases there are in the province or how many that are people in tenancies resulting from fixed-term leases. So to have that, we would have to basically have a registry of all tenants and landlords in the province and log all of the leases and such. So we don't presently have that. I don't think any other province does. So it's difficult to really offer a true picture of what's happening in the province. A lot of the information that we receive, and I imagine my panel members here as well, receive anecdotally, as well as from ACORN survey. So I don't want to say that's anecdotal information, but it's from that was from their survey that they received those results. So not to say that fixed-term leases aren't being used, as you mentioned, for unintended purposes, but we simply don't know exactly how many that. We are working on a new system, which we've mentioned in the public before, that we're going to try to have more robust statistics so that we can respond better to knowing what exactly is happening in the rental market. Unfortunately, we're still working on that.
MLA Rankin.
Thank you, and I guess I have limited time. I'd like to ask maybe Legal Aid if they think the province should collect data to determine the issue here. It was mentioned today that some landlords are exclusively offering fixed-term leases. So clearly that's not the intent for fixed-term leases with massive landlords exclusively offering them. So maybe I'll let Legal Aid and ACORN respond to the need for data so the province has a handle on this issue.
Ms. Macintosh.
Thank you. Yes, I would agree that there certainly is a need for some level of data collection on tenants and landlords in general. One of the difficulties that we often face in advocating for increasing capacity for our office is a lack of data. We have data regarding who accesses our services, but there is, generally speaking, primarily what we rely on is anecdotal evidence of what we see coming through our office each day. But I could see, practically speaking, how that might be challenging for the residential tenancy program to collect, but certainly if efforts were made, that would benefit both tenants and landlords in the province to have something concrete to look at when determining how to make the next move.
MLA Rankin.
Okay, I'm good for now. Thanks.
Okay, so we will move to questions from the PC Caucus, and I recognize MLA Stolov.
Thank you very much. Since we're on fixed-term leases, I just have a couple questions about fixed-term leases. We are receiving, as you've indicated, many complaints on fixed-term leases. And I guess the question is, what efforts are you making there to kind of, hearing the complaints? Are we working on cleaning any things up or making things any better with respect to fixed-term leases?
MLA, I will assume that's a question for the
ADM.
department.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll recognize ADM O'Toole, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. So, as I mentioned earlier, fixed-term leases have been part of our system for a really long time, for decades. And recognizing that it's also a really challenging time, and we're very sorry and disappointed, of course, to hear the stories about fixed-term leases being used inappropriately. Given that the vacancy rate is low, inflationary pressures are high, that's exacerbating the issue, perhaps. As I mentioned, too, we want to take the time to make sure we understand a change to legislation. Given what I just said about inflationary pressures and a vacancy rate, those things change over time, sometimes a short time and sometimes a long time. And so before we embed a rule in legislation that could potentially be on the books for many, many years, we want to understand what is the impact of that going to be and how are conditions in the market changing before we implement a permanent rule. And so that's a bit of the context or the lens through which we view changing a piece of legislation or providing recommendations to government to change a piece of legislation. I've heard a couple of times now by my colleagues on this side about people signing fixed-term leases unaware, perhaps, that they were signing fixed-term leases. And so there are protections in the Act currently for people who feel like they've been misled or signed documents that don't articulate or explicitly state that it is a fixed-term lease. There are protections for that. We would encourage anyone who feels they've been wronged to apply to the program so that that dispute can be heard and resolved. We would also, in the same breath, suggest that it's really important for anyone signing a lease to be aware of what they're signing. Sometimes it's very small print, and so, but it is there. And so it's really important for the health of the relationship going forward between a tenant and a landlord to, at the first moment, to understand really what you're signing. And we recognize that there is sometimes a power imbalance that's been mentioned many times too, about the power between a landlord and a tenant. And so your first power as a tenant is to understand what it is you're signing. So we would encourage tenants to be aware of that right from the get-go. I'd just emphasize that there are protections. If someone has signed something and they feel like they've been duped or tricked, or they feel like they've been treated unfairly or wrongly, that there are protections in the Residential Tenancies Act for that and apply to the program.
MLA Stoylov.
Thank you for your response on that. You probably reiterated this, but just one more time to make sure I'm clear and others here. What is the main purpose of a fixed-term lease, I guess, and why do you think at the end of the day it's causing so many issues? It appears to be such a simple and straightforward thing, but it isn't. Any thoughts on that?
ADM O'Toole?
Thanks for the question. So very simply, a fixed-term lease is, as it suggests, it's a defined period of time. It's a fixed term. At which time it ends, with no opportunity for renewal unless that's agreed to by the parties. They're typically used for short-term tenancies. So situations where there might be temporary workers or people on contract, or student situations, or other learning or skilled trade situations where people are learning on the job, for example, where they need temporary housing of some sort. A fixed-term lease that's originally what a fixed-term lease was intended to do, is to provide tenancy agreements in those types of situations. And what we know, and which has been articulated here at the table, is given vacancy rates over the last number of years and inflationary pressures, landlords are now offering fixed-term leases for people who do not typically fit the category of a student or a temporary worker, or those situations that I just described. And so tenants are then left without a solution for a longer-term tenancy for their particular housing situation. And so, as I articulated, before we make changes to that rule, given what we hope is the temporary nature of the vacancy rate. We know the vacancy rate was at historic lows, below 1% for the Halifax area up until last year when it started to change. The vacancy rate has doubled, so it's now just slightly above 2%, and we're expecting a federal report on that quite soon. And so we know that dynamic is changing. And so before we embed in law a rule that would potentially last a very long time, we want to be sure what the market conditions are.
MLA Stoylov.
Thank you for that response. And the last question, when we go and look at the Residential Tenancies, Tenants Act, how do we decide, or how do you decide, what are the changes that need to be implemented? I assume it's an ongoing process, but can you just give us a little bit of feedback on things you're looking at, things we can improve on the Tenancies Act?
ADM O'Toole, please.
Sure. So that has many layers. How you decide, what is in scope for maybe a look at a piece of legislation. Part of our work ongoing in a department or as part of a program is to always be doing research, always be looking at what is the latest practice around a particular program or how it operates, and what the legislation is that supports that, and then to make recommendations to government on how can we improve or how can we do better in a particular area. So those recommendations for changes may come from staff who are experiencing the delivery of a program in a certain way and who are constantly receiving feedback on the program from those that program impacts. So in this case, tenants and landlords. We meet in the residential tenancies program specifically. We meet regularly with partners, both formally. We have a couple of meetings per year with our partners, but we also meet informally. We have very much an open door policy, if I can say that, with partners who can call us anytime. Melissa is the director of the program and is willing to take calls anytime there's an issue or a conversation that a partner wants to have with us. Melissa would be on the receiving end of those conversations. And so we're always presented with issues or nuances or how a program is delivered and feedback on that. And an example of a recent change would be with regard to subtenancies and subtenants. So the amendments that were introduced last fall were around subtenancies, whereby if you were subleasing your unit, you couldn't profit from that exchange. You couldn't charge more for rent than you were being charged yourself for rent if you were subletting your unit. So that amendment came about as a result of a conversation that happened between program staff and Dalhousie Legal Aid. So just to highlight that, yes, we do have an open door policy when it comes to having conversations with our stakeholders about how the program is working and run. And then we take those conversations and we turn them where we can and where it's where it's possible for us to, turn that into a new rule, if that's appropriate, then we do that.
Further questions, MLA Stoylov?
Thank you very much for that, and I'll pass the floor on to my
And I
other
would
members.
recognize MLA McQuarrie, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I just want to thank everyone for all of your hard work and caring, looking after some very vulnerable people. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time away from that to help us understand a lot of the issues that you're facing. Thank you very much. And I have some questions written here, but there was one story that Heather Clark told about someone calling to access your support. And I just want to ask you, what supports was ACORN able to engage for the couple that you described?
I would recognize Ms. Clark.
Thank you. So I get these calls all the time, and basically people are looking for support. We have a very good relationship with Dalhousie Legal Aid, and typically that's the support that we do give them, is refer them to Dalhousie Legal Aid. But at the same time, Dalhousie Legal Aid has done a very good job at setting up a website that can help tenants. And as you know, with this alphabet soup program through the Tenancy Board. Another thing that I just want to mention as well, for those in the room that don't know, the city of Halifax has a landlord registry. And it was to be all landlords within the city were supposed to be registered in the registry by April of last year. So we don't have public access to it yet, but we're fighting for public access. And since Tenancy is going to start publishing some tenancy outcomes, we assume that the city can do the same, give public access to this information so tenants can make themselves more aware of who the bad players are, because we know there are good landlords, but we also know there are some that are repeat offenders and very bad repeat offenders. So they could easily, well, when I looked at it, you could easily figure out who is offering fixed-term leases and who's not. You know, it's very easy to determine how many people are offering fixed-term leases. And the story I also told about a resident manager uncovering the fact that leasing agents, when they find rent tenants for new buildings, they get paid a higher commission if they get the tenant to sign a fixed-term lease. My resident manager told me that face-to-face a couple of weeks ago. So, you know, we try not to upset people, and we don't have any legal authority, but we do refer them to Dal Legal Aid. Even the Tenancy Board has no teeth. So even when they're putting these things in place, such as offering assistance for people who feel they've been wronged, the Tenancy Board has no teeth. They really can't enforce that. So there is no support for people who feel they have been wronged. Thank you.
MLA McQuarrie.
Thank you. This question is for Service Nova Scotia. I'd like you, could you describe when the dispute process as it relates to notice to quit, particularly for maybe non-payment of rent, from the perspective of the tenant, and include kind of maybe improvements in wait time and supports that are available to the tenant that this process would engage for them.
And I'll ask Ms. Mosher, please.
Thank you for the question. So I'll try not to get too in the weeds on this, but so as far as from a tenant's perspective, so maybe I'll kind of offer an example. So if rent is due on May 1st, okay, so today is May 6th, okay. Sorry. So if so, from a tenant's perspective, rent is agreed upon in the lease when it's due. So it could be due any day of the month, but typically it's the 1st. If rent is due on the 1st, if rent is not paid, a landlord could reach out to a tenant, say, hey, a reminder, rent is due. Those things are allowed, but a formal non-payment of rent, and what my colleague here from ACORN referred to as alphabet soup, all of our forms have letters. So the first notice that a landlord can serve a tenant is a Form D, and that's the notice of non-payment of rent. So on that notice, it's basically and so that can be done after, so as of April 30th, that can be done after 3 days. So in legislation, it's 3 days. In actual days, it's 5. So this is kind of where we get into the weeds a bit. The first day has to expire, so that's day 1, and then, or that's not even day 1. So the first day has to expire. So day 1, day 2, day 3, the third day has to expire, and then the landlord can serve on the 5th day. So it works on to the 5th day of the month. So then that notice is served to the tenant. So on that notice, then there's a description of what options that a tenant has. And they have 10 days to take action. So again, the 5th day isn't day 1 for the tenant. The first day starts on the next day. So then they have 10 days to take action. So in that, they can pay their rent, relocate, and leave the unit. Rent is still owed at that point, but nonetheless, they can leave, or they can file an application with the Residential Tenancies Program. And so that would be a Form J. But if, and so this is kind of that response period that's been referred to a bit this morning. And so once, so receiving this notice, a tenant can file an application. They can do this online, as well as in person at an Access Nova Scotia Centre. Excuse me. And so once that's done, the notice to quit, that Form D I mentioned earlier, is set aside. So this will result in a hearing. We have telephone hearings. And so with the timelines, as you requested, our timelines right now for a hearing is a little less than 4 weeks. So right now, if we're talking in a span of a month, so we're probably mid-month May at this point with my example, and then a hearing would be scheduled probably near the end of June at this point. So all throughout this time, rent is due. And so part of why we've been talking about shortening of the eviction timelines a bit, and with the goal of having the shorter periods in which a tenant or a landlord can serve notice and that the tenant has time to take action, discussions between the tenant and landlord with the assistance of the residential tenancy program can take place sooner. So this can, the purpose of that was to facilitate and to foster mediation and cooperation. So where the tenant isn't so far down, 3 months into 4 months of not paying their rent, a landlord might have no desire to mediate, no desire to keep the tenant in their unit. They might just say, forget it, I don't want to mediate, because mediation is an option. It's optional. That's kind of just a principle of procedural fairness and natural justice. However, if the time from when the original rent was due so much time hasn't passed, then a landlord might be more apt to mediate. So, or a tenant isn't so far behind that they're not able to dig themselves out of that proverbial hole. So that's kind of the timeline aspect to that. In terms of options of what supports are available to tenants, we have a really good relationship with 211. So 211 is a provincially funded service where it can connect people with various programs and services that can help people. And 211 is well versed in residential tenancies matters, and as well as other programs such as the province has 14 diversion programs throughout the province that can offer tenants help with paying their rent if they're struggling to pay their rent. We encourage, and I know I've spoken with constituency assistants across the province, and they really do encourage not to wait. So even if a tenant knows they can't pay their rent on the 1st, they shouldn't wait until they get their notice to access these kinds of resources to contact 211 or the diversion programs. And also we encourage people to talk to their landlord. If people can resolve these issues outside of the residential tenancies program, that's our optimal solution. That's what we hope for the best. But we're here if that's not possible, and that's why we're here for the dispute resolution process. I think that was the question.
MLA Macquarie.
Yeah, thank you very much. This again is for Service Nova Scotia. Can you describe the diversion funding that's available during the dispute process, please?
ADM O'Toole.
Thanks for the question. So the diversion funding it doesn't reside in Service Nova Scotia, nor does it reside within the program, but there are 14 different programs across the province where diversion funding is possible. And so as my colleague mentioned, we would encourage, there's nothing about the residential tenancies program that would discourage tenants from having healthy conversations with their landlords if they know they're going to be in a spot where maybe the rent is due on a certain day and they can't make that day. Please reach out and have a conversation with your landlord would be our, that's what we would encourage. If issues can be resolved in advance of ever having ever having to come to the program, that's a wonderful outcome for the tenant and the landlord. And so the ability to address those issues early, one of the things that we did that Melissa already mentioned is we established a relationship with 211 whereby an early caller, someone who thinks they may have a problem paying the rent, or who knows they're going to have a problem paying the rent, if they're able to reach the supports well in advance of that, because some of those programs can take some time to navigate and to apply to and to access. So the sooner that access happens, that's why our relationship with 211 is important, because when there's an early caller and there's an early recognition that this tenant may have an issue coming around their tenancy, if we can connect people, not we, but if the system can connect people to the programs that they need to help them, the sooner the better on that, so that they can maybe avoid even having themselves in front of a program or having a dispute to resolve. And Melissa's point again around the eviction timelines, part of the design of that is to get to a place where the issues are resolved earlier instead of way down the road. We heard a lot from landlords who, some who would say that they were well into the second month of late payment of rent before getting their issues on a track. And so we know then that if you back that up a bit, there's more of an opportunity to get resolution to that issue sooner if the parties are talking. So we don't manage the diversion funding ourselves, but we certainly are aware that there's diversion funding available. There's rent supplements available through other departments, and we would connect to those if we're able to. If we identify it, we would love to have a warm handoff, but certainly 211 can do that for us as well.
MLA Macquarie.
Very much. Again, for Service Nova Scotia, what kind of cooperation, what kind of outreach do you have for advocacy groups so that they're able to access these programs that you're describing when they are advocating for tenants?
Ms. Mosher.
Thank you for the question. So we have extensive relationships with landlord and tenant groups throughout the province. So there's more tenant groups than there are. There's pretty much one landlord group, it might be two, but the Rental Housing Providers of Nova Scotia, and there's several smaller tenant advocacy groups. So we have a relationship with ACORN as well as Dalhousie Legal Aid and Nova Scotia Legal Aid, as they are tenant advocates. We work with them as well and meet with them. We have roughly two, what's the word I'm looking for? Standard times that we meet, and we meet with all these groups together. We invite them to meet with us. We call them our partners meetings, and where we'll talk about, we want to hear from them, and we also provide them with information about what's going on with the program, but then we want to hear from them too about what's going on in their worlds. But in between those, essentially we kind of, as Mr. O'Toole mentioned earlier, we have a bit of an open door policy. So if we're ever asked to go to an event or attend a meeting or provide information, we do so. Actually tonight I'm going to Woodbine Community Meeting, which is a land lease community in Beaverbank. So we're invited and we go. So we do things like that as well. And also I have a good relationship with constituency assistants. I think they pass my phone number around, which is totally fine. So if they have a constituency member who's come to their office and they're experiencing some kind of challenge, then they often call me, because then they can sign that waiver in which that they can speak on their behalf. So I will talk to the constituency assistant to help them as well. So, and I mean, the constituency assistants, as you all know, are not necessarily, for one, they're not an advocate for one or the other, but mostly an advocate for the person. So, but try to help them through the process for whatever they're experiencing. So that's generally how we engage with our partners, and we work with them as much as we can, and they also are free to reach out to us whenever they need to as well.
MLA McCrory?
Thank you very much. That's all from me. I'll pass it on to my colleagues. Thank you very much.
I'd recognize MLA McGowan.
Good morning, everyone. And again, I want to thank everyone for being here as we discuss this really important topic. We are aware that far too many Nova Scotians are having difficulty with housing, and our government is focused on responding to that. I think that that's central to the changes that you see in the residential tenancy program, and why we are so focused on building more homes so that every Nova Scotian has an option and the appropriate home to live in and to thrive. So thank you for being here to discuss that. I do have a couple of questions and for Service Nova Scotia. With regards to compliance and enforcement, we talked about that at the very beginning. I'm just wondering if you could help me understand why a report was, asked for, and then ultimately why that unit was never put in place.
ADM O'Toole.
Yeah, so the department commissioned a report a couple of years ago, or commissioned a consultant to do a report a few years ago on if an enforcement unit was established, what would it look like? Not if we should establish one, but if we were to establish one, what would that look like? And so through that work, we identified four main goals or four main principles of the outcome of that work. And those principles were to balance the rights of landlords and tenants, to promote deterrence and early resolution of issues, to be accessible, and to act quickly to resolve emergency or high priority situations. And at the end of the day, the decision was not to move forward with a compliance and enforcement unit because all of those goals or principles could be established through the existing residential tenancies program. And the lack of enforcement is often cited as a reason why to establish a compliance and enforcement unit, when in fact there is an enforcement mechanism in the existing residential tenancies program, and it's called small claims court. So at the end of the process of hearings, someone who has, an order issued in their favor can opt to have that order turned into an order of the court. And maybe I'll rely on my colleague, Ms. Mosher, to articulate that a bit more. But that turns it over to the courts then to render decisions and assign enforcement activity by sheriff's services. So the existing program does provide a mechanism for enforcement through the court system. So it's not correct to say that there is no enforcement. There in fact is, and it's been part of the program for many years. It does, however, require the party to act at a certain point to enable that enforcement to happen.
Ms. Mosher, would you like to add further to that?
Yeah, so just in terms of the how an order can be enforced piece. So essentially after, I kind of walked through the process a little earlier. So once a hearing is held, then an order is rendered. So that's called a director's order. Director's orders can't be enforced. So after a director's order is issued, there's a 10-day appeal period. So either party can appeal that decision, and so you would do that through small claims. So if that doesn't take place, that order then can stand. And so let's say, for example, it is an eviction order. The landlord would then need to contact their residential tenancy officer, and they would say, I'd like this order enforced. The residential tenancy officer sends that order. They contact small claims court to have that converted to a small claims court order. And then once it's a small claims court order, sheriff services can then be engaged. So sheriff services can only enforce small claims court orders. That's why that piece is necessary, and so then that's where the enforcement arm the program can be utilized. So if they need to forcibly remove a tenant where they've received an order of eviction and they haven't left yet, then sheriff's is there as well. There's other pieces that sheriff services can do in terms of enforcing an order. So it's not just that, but if there's money owed by either party, they can do wage garnishment and stuff like that. So there's other pieces, but the party has to engage with sheriff services in order to pursue that.
Emily McGowan with a minute left in this section.
Yeah, so I would just ask if you had learned anything from the Davis peer report, and if so, what?
ADM O'Toole.
Yeah, just briefly, I think, as I mentioned, the goals or the principles that were established as part of that work we could achieve through the program that we have now. And some of the learnings were around, in particular, the triaging or the need to hear more serious cases earlier. That was a key learning for us through the work with the consultant, and there have been some amendments to the program to enable triaging or hearing more urgent cases sooner as a result of that work.
MLA McGowan.
I'm not sure that in 15 seconds I have anything except to reiterate that I'm grateful for your answers, and I'm grateful for everyone that is here. So thank you again.
Thank you. And we do genuinely appreciate when we have the passionate folks in this room. We want to allow time for some closing remarks, but even with that, we do have time for some additional questions. We will divide that time 6, and 12 minutes, beginning with the NDP, and I would recognize MLA Wilson.
So we have the 12 minutes, right?
You have 6, unless you cut a deal with the gentleman next to you.
Thanks so much. I'll make it quick. So thank you so much. I've been in your seats, and I know it can be difficult, so I thank you for presenting with the best information you have. You mentioned earlier, in Nova Scotia, the vacancy rate has doubled to 2%. Can you tell me, of that 2%, if we use the definition of affordability as 30% of an income, how much of that 2% is affordable to Nova Scotians?
ADM O'Toole.
I'm sorry, I don't have the data in front of me, so I'm unable to answer that question.
MLA Wilson.
Sorry. It's a rare opportunity where we all agree in this chamber. If I understood and heard correctly, I heard that we all agree that fixed-term leases can be problematic, and I think I heard the term is an exacerbating factor, and we are in a housing crisis. While I emphasize and live in an evidence-based profession, I think trying to look for the evidence for legislation can be analysis by paralysis. So if we are in a crisis, and if we are practicing in a culture of problem solving versus problem stretching, why not help me truly understand, why not remove the fixed lease now and reevaluate it in 2 or 3 years? It's one action that would have a huge impact, and the anecdotal evidence of the need is right before us. So if we value anecdotal evidence, why not take that action, problem solving right now, and remove the fixed lease and reevaluate in, say, 3 years?
ADM O'Toole.
Yeah, thanks for the question. For the reasons I already mentioned, both in my opening remarks and in answers to other questions, looking at what are the market conditions? How are they changing? How rapidly are they changing? And really considering closely, what are the unintended impacts of making a permanent change in legislation? And how might that impact the market or the system that we're working in prior to making those changes is really important, given that it's a very dynamic situation. As I mentioned, the vacancy rate is climbing. It's higher than it was last year. And we're starting to see conditions on the market improve. So before we make any permanent changes in legislation, we'd really want to work to understand what the longer term, perhaps decades long impacts might be around the removal of fixed term leases, because they do serve an important and useful purpose.
MLA Wilson.
I would argue that nothing in life is fixed, and I've learned that the hard way, including legislation. So what about legislation can be changed within the same year? So what about, have you ever considered allowing the tenant and the landlord actually to have the option of negotiating whether it's a fixed lease or a different alternative lease. Because right now there's for many renters there is no option. So what about an option of putting the decision between the landlord and their renter, that there is the tenant an option for discussion on the table? Right now there's no option for many people.
ADM O'Toole.
Certainly understand your point and your question, and part of our role is to provide options to government to consider. And so that would be something that we, part of our goal as a program is to provide and to research and to look into what might options be for the future, and we will continue to do that.
MLA Wilson.
Okay. Thank you. Having been in your shoes and brief ministers, often you do provide options. Have you provided the option to your minister of removing the fixed lease?
ADM O'Toole.
As we do for all of our program areas, we provide a buffet of options for our leaders and our ministers to consider in terms of what changes they may want to make to any number of pieces of legislation and for specific program areas. And that certainly wouldn't be different for the residential tenancies program.
So in that
MLA Wilson.
So in that buffet was the option of removing fixed lease there?
ADM O'Toole. Sorry, you guys you're trying to maximize time. It's a good thing.
Thanks for the question. So yes, that would have certainly been one of the options along with many others that were presented.
MLA Wilson.
Thank you.
With 1 minute. Oh, MLA Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what I'm hearing is changes that need to be made through residential tenancy will take time, and they consider what the impact is before they change the conditions. So given this and knowing that the feedback that's coming here today that has been across this table over the past 4 years with the similar and almost exact same issues and same problems, and the numbers continue to rise. With that, in the next sitting, is there going to be legislation to change the fixed term lease loophole and to also implement some type of rent control? Because what we're seeing is large numbers of people having a hard time, and even more harder time with the change in legislation that was just put forward.
ADM O'Toole.
Thanks for the question. Yes, as I mentioned earlier, we're always open to hearing from our partners about what's working and what's not. We have good forums and good mechanisms to enable those conversations to happen.
Sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt as we have ended the NDP question segment, and I would now offer the floor to MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm interested in the answer, so I'll let the witness continue, but I would add, given the suite of potential options at the fixed term lease changes, given that the problem has grown significantly in absence of any data presented by government today, would there be an option to look at regulatory changes, since it seems like we know when a fixed term lease can be used for practical reasons? Again, if there is a known issue where someone needs something for a fixed period of time. But we know the problems associated with this, and we're not in session, although, as my colleague mentioned, law changes and can change easily. But why not look at a regulatory change if that's possible? And I'll let you finish what your thought was in the last question, because it's related.
I'll recognize ADM O'Toole.
Thank you, and thanks for the question. So as I was saying, we've in our discussions here today have articulated that we have existing pathways and forums that enable good exchanges and information flow between the partners that we have in this program area and ourselves. And in fact, we encourage that and look forward to those to that feedback. We then take that feedback and we formulate any number of recommendations to government about what the options may be to change either legislation or regulations, and we will continue to work in that way to collect feedback about the program and the legislation and the regulations and make those recommendations. Fixed term leases is not something that we can addressed through regulation. It is a legislative piece.
MLA Rankin.
Thanks for that answer. It's helpful. In terms of the changes for the truncated time that tenants now have to respond to evictions, I'm wondering if the department has notified tenants in any meaningful way about the changes in the eviction process. How are tenants to know about this?
Okay, Ms. Mosher, please.
Thank you for the question. So we've done quite an extensive communication strategy regarding the new changes. There was a press release released earlier in April indicating the date. I mean, people were familiar with the changes because they were introduced in the fall, but then the press release came out in mid-April. And so then also we have some new communication strategies available to the public. We have a video that's been released that explains the new changes. And then we have some more documentation describing the changes as well. We have, our website also has a lot of this information on it too. We have the new legislative changes. We have some, we have a new, it's called a front door on the novascotia.ca/RTA website. And so that offers some, we have some more descriptive information for both tenants and landlords, an area that I personally am looking forward to improving to make it easier for people to understand.
MLA Rankin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And given that we heard today that there are concerns that this will result in more evictions and that accessing legal support might be a challenge, is there plans to offer more support to groups like Legal Aid to help with what we've heard today will be pressure on these organizations?
ADM O'Toole, please.
So as my colleague mentioned, our effort is to get the word out there via the tools that we have. So our website being this new front door that was referred to, offering a more streamlined way to access information that is unique to you, either if you're a tenant or if you're a landlord, to access the information that you need. And so our hope is that we can also work through our existing any invitations that we get to attend sessions in various communities across the province. As my colleague mentioned, we're happy to go to those and talk about what the requirements of the program are, what the rules are, and how people can access the program. And I'd emphasize that with respect to the changing timelines, that it's not 3 days and you're out. It's actually on the 5th day that the landlord can deliver an eviction notice, and then the tenant has 10 days after that to act. And they can either pay their rent, they can leave the unit, or they can apply to the program. And if they apply to the program, if they feel they've been wronged, then the clock stops, and they don't have to leave their unit while that hearing process unfolds.
MLA Rankin with a little under a minute, please.
Okay, I'll ask Legal Aid. Will this put pressure on your resources, and will you need more resources based on these changes?
I recognize Ms. Macintosh.
Thank you. I absolutely anticipate that this will put more pressure on our resources, and this will stretch us to our absolute max capacity.
MLA Rankin.
Thank you very much for all of your time today. Appreciate it.
We'll move on to questions from the PC party, and I would recognize MLA Van Exen.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all of you for being here and for the time that you've taken to prepare your notes and your answers for us. I wanted to jump into a little bit around the security deposits and how it impacts the renters. So if you could elaborate a little bit more around the changes and what you're seeing as the impacts of those changes.
I recognize ADM O'Toole.
Yeah, so my colleague, Ms. Mosher, can provide lots of detail on this one, but this is an area that we're excited by because it streamlines significantly the process around damage deposits and the return or the keeping of the damage deposit for either whether you're a tenant or you're a landlord. We've moved to an online process around that, the details of which I'll leave to Ms. Mosher to describe.
I recognize Ms. Mosher.
Thank you. So last summer, I believe it was August 1st, we proclaimed some legislative changes around security deposits. And also with that, developed a new online process. So We made it very clear, or it was made clear in the legislation, where 10 days after the tenancy ends, a landlord, if they want to keep any or all of a security deposit, they have to file a form. So back to the alphabet soup, this is called a Form R. And so with that Form R, they have to file that form with the program, which they can now do online. We get about 99% of this is done online now. And they also have to give a copy of that form to their tenant. So if they're keeping $5 or the whole security deposit. If they don't file that form, the tenant is entitled to keep all of their security deposit. Regardless of damages, rental arrears, whatever the case may be, they are entitled to keep it all. So if a tenant doesn't receive that Form R in those 10 days, and they haven't received their security deposit, they can then file what's called a Form S, and this again is on another online form that's being readily used online. And so this process is a non-hearing process. So they don't have to engage in a hearing. It's more so, was the Form R served? Do we have record of the Form R? The landlord has an opportunity to say that, oh yeah, I did. They have an opportunity to respond, essentially. But if there was no Form R given to the tenant, then the tenant is almost automatically awarded their security deposit back. So it's a much more streamlined process than what was before. And it's an easier process for landlords to submit the form, easier process for the tenants to get the form, and then engage with the program. So if there is, if the landlord claims that there are damages and there is a need to keep the security deposit, the rest of our program is still available to them to reclaim those damages. So it's not that they could never reclaim their damages, but they have to follow this process within that 10-day period, which was made very clear.
I recognize MLA Van Exen.
Oh, thank you very much. You had mentioned earlier today that you were providing materials to help the public understand some of the recent changes. You mentioned a video and some. What are the topics of conversation within those videos? Like, would they talk about the security deposit changes? What are some of those changes that are being described in those?
I recognize Ms. Mosher.
Thank you. So we just have one video, so sorry to oversell that a little bit. It's just on the new changes, but I'm very excited about the prospect of now we want to do more videos. To me, this is a very accessible method of educating the public. So I'm looking forward to, and that is part of our plan, but looking forward to developing more videos.
I recognize MLA Van Exen.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. Just a second here. So can you describe a little bit more about how the Residential Tenancy Board acts to protect tenants from illegal rent increases? Maybe give us a more fuller understanding of that. I know we've touched on it a few times, but.
And I recognize Ms. Mosher.
Thank you. So with the Interim Residential Rental Increase Cap Amount Act, so that states that rent can only be increased, in the RTA, the rent can only be increased once in a 12-month period. The ERICA legislation limits that to 5% a year. So that also protects tenants in a fixed-term lease as long as they stay in the same unit. So regardless of the duration of the lease, as long as they're in the same unit, but once in a 12-month period. So if a tenant has received a rental increase above the rent cap or more frequently than the 12-month period, they can certainly apply to the residential tenancies program, and that would be, as I've mentioned before, the Form J, and then they could, that would result in a hearing, essentially. So then the tenant would have opportunity to present evidence, landlord would have an opportunity to present evidence, and a director's order would be issued. And this has happened from time to time with the program, and in many cases where the rent is reduced back to what it should be. And because, so part of with that, so it's not, oh, my rent was increased 8% or 10% or whatever, and now it's going to go down to 5%. Well, part of the rental increase notification, a landlord has to give 4 months notice of a rental increase. So it couldn't just be, it would have to be put back down to the amount that it was before the increase. So it wouldn't just be adjusted to the correct increase, it would be to what it was before. And then if a landlord wanted to increase it to the correct amount, they would have to give 4 months notice again, and but again, still only one increase in a 12-month period.
Thank you. MLA Van Exen, do you have further questions?
No, that's all. Thank you
Okay,
very
I
much.
had a
Yep.
signal over here first, so I will recognize MLA McGowan.
Yeah. Again, so this is for Service Nova Scotia. So I'm just curious, how long does it typically take to address a complaint? And from the time the tenant or the landlord reaches out to the program and when they hear a decision made?
I recognize ADM O'Toole.
Yeah, so the program has, thank you for the question. The program has worked very hard over the last year to significantly reduce average wait times. It would have been typical over the last number of years, say, for wait times to hover in the range of 5 to as many as 8 weeks from the time a person applies to the program to the time they get a hearing. And thanks to the hard work of the team, those numbers are now down typically below 4 weeks, hovering somewhere, I think right now, around 3.7 weeks. So we're trying very hard, recognizing that an individual who applies to the program may also need time to prepare, so deliver things or collect their own evidence and to prepare for a hearing. 3 weeks is above 3 weeks is a good amount of time to be able to prepare yourself for a hearing. And so to have a wait time right now around 3.7 weeks is really good. We're aiming to keep it that way. And keep those wait times to a minimum for people who are facing sometimes really difficult situations. But where we can triage or hear more urgent in tenancy issues faster, we will certainly aim to triage those and hear them faster where we can.
I recognize MLA Macquarie.
Thank you. Thanks for describing the ways that you're supporting tenants. I'd like to ask Service Nova Scotia about imbalance and how, to the extent to which vacancy rates and housing supply affect that imbalance in the tenancy market.
I recognize ADM O'Toole.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Balance is something I started my opening remarks commenting on the importance of balance in the program and making sure that we are not in a situation where we're favoring tenants or favoring landlords. It's a very difficult balance to achieve, and it's a very delicate one. And I think the issues that you heard here today around fixed-term leases and exacerbating the situation around relatively low vacancy rates and high inflationary pressures. That's why the decisions that we make around recommendations that we provide to government are so carefully considered, because what on the surface appears to be an easy decision around making a new rule can create unintended impacts for the system for many years. And we try to avoid situations where those unintended impacts create an imbalance in the system. And so we work very carefully, hearing the feedback from our partners in this program and community members and those who experience the program, and taking that feedback and the information that we get through that dialogue into recommendations to government is one of those ways that we try and achieve that balance. MLA Macquarie.
We're currently seeing a trend of increasing housing supply and vacancy rates increasing, which is certainly will help tenants. What do you foresee going forward as these rates continue to rise? What kind of interventions or actions, what kinds of side effects are you seeing, are you anticipating as you move forward as a result of that?
I recognize ADM O'Toole.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Ultimately, the work that's underway now around creating more affordable housing will be key to the kind of work that we manage in the residential tenancies program, because more choice for tenants means they will be able to find more housing that suits their specific needs or addresses a specific issue. So the ability to move from one unit to another simply because other units are available will have significant impact in the system and in the work that we manage on a daily basis.
45 seconds on the clock. Further questions, MLA Macquarie? Or any of his colleagues?
Well, really quickly,
I recognize MLA McGowan.
could you discuss how the heating assistant rebate program has helped tenants in 30 seconds?
ADM O'Toole.
For those tenants that pay for heat, that is $600 in their pocket that they would not have had otherwise.
Thank you. Any further questions?
And I find myself at that magical 15 seconds again. So with that, I will again say thank you.
Okay, and we will conclude the questions portion of this meeting. We do want to provide the opportunity for closing remarks, and perhaps we'll begin again with Mr. Culligan, sorry.
Thank you. I've heard today broad acceptance that there are abuses of fixed-term leases, and that the province is reluctant to take action to regulate those fixed-term leases in the absence of evidence. This is not rocket science. We just went through a federal election. We saw poll after poll being released. It would be quite simple to hire a marketing firm, a polling agency, to do some surveys. This is how the CMHC data is collected, how we come up with the data for the rental rates. Their surveys, their phone calls to landlords. We can figure this out. I think we have a situation here where the government doesn't want to figure this out because they know the answer. And the answer is that fixed-term leases are becoming more prevalent, they're being abused, and that they're a kind of a tool for landlords that's allowing them to run roughshod over tenant protections. The position has been taken that that there will be supports available for tenants who are behind on their rent and need a little bit more time to pay. In my experience, even though these shelter diversion programs exist, they all have different eligibility criteria. They have limited budgets. They're not unlimited budgets. They just get given a chunk of money that they have to dole out. They have to triage. They have to prioritize. You have to get meetings between the tenant and the shelter diversion agency. It takes work and time to get a hold of this money, and often there's restrictions on the amount of money that they'll give out or how frequently they'll give that money out. This is not a large-scale solution to the problem of housing affordability, and we are quite concerned that we will have a lot of vulnerable people coming through our doors who are slightly behind on their rent, who are late on their rent, often through no fault of our own, and will be evicted into homelessness as a result. Thank you.
ADM O'Toole.
Thank you for the opportunity to attend today and to answer your questions. In closing, I'd encourage anyone who is experiencing difficulty with their tenant-landlord relationship to apply to the program. Really, the only way to have your problems heard by the program is to apply to the program, and that's what it's there for. It's there to resolve disputes, and we welcome hearing from people. We also know that there's nothing preventing people from reaching out to their landlord or to their tenant if there are issues, and to resolve those issues through a healthy relationship. But we know that's not always the case, and so apply to the program if there are issues. Thank you.
Ms. Clark, do you wish to make a final comment?
Hi, thank you. In conclusion, ACORN wants to work closely with tenancy government and housing supportive agencies to come up with fair solutions ending the discrimination against low-income seniors, disabled, and marginalized communities. I look forward to those invitations. This is the first one I've had. This is the first invitation I've had. We invited Melissa to one of our events, but, I mean, access to information is very sporadic. I will tell you that. Lack of safe, affordable housing is the #1 cause for health issues, including mental health, food insecurity, crime, unhoused, intimate partner violence, and child abuse. It's time to do the right thing, and we can do that by even temporarily stopping the fixed-term lease evictions. They are no-fault evictions, and it needs to stop. As for the $600 energy rebate, Ecology Action Centre has a study out on this. Over 50% of Nova Scotians have trouble paying their energy bills. Yes, it is exorbitant. And $600 a year for a single mother who is trying to raise children or trying to get away from domestic violence or some sort of abuse, $600 a year, what would you do with that? How far would that go? It doesn't go far at all. I highly encourage you to do the right thing and stop killing people by leaving them on the streets and giving them no place to go. Those diversion programs with 14 facilities, I would like a copy of those 14 agencies that are providing rent money to single mothers and people who are being evicted. Thank you.
And Ms. Macintosh.
Thank you. I will be brief. It was disappointing to hear from the representatives for Service Nova Scotia that the government appears to be taking a rather laissez-faire approach to a universally accepted problem with fixed-term leases. This type of approach is not appropriate in the face of a housing crisis and the growing demand from tenants and tenant advocates for change that needs to occur urgently and needs to have a meaningful, needs to engage with meaningful protections for tenants. There are a range of options that the government could consider and implement immediately. They could consider requiring landlords provide notice to tenants when they intend not to renew their lease. And this is something that I would argue could be achieved via regulation, and there's no reason why something like that can't be a first step towards more long-term and more substantial protections for tenants regarding fixed-term leases. There was a statement about having protections in the Act where fixed-term leases are entered into improperly. But I am not aware of any provisions within the Residential Tenancies Act that currently address improper fixed-term leases. Rather, it's up to the principles of contract law to deal with situations in which tenants are signing fixed-term leases due to misrepresentation or a lack of consideration or unconscionability. It's up to the residential tenancy program to make sure that a standard form lease is clear for tenants when they're signing this and ensure that rights and responsibilities regarding fixed-term leases are made clear and in plain language so that tenants understand them. Landlords don't even have to use standard form leases when they're entering into tenancies, and so there is a gap there as well. In terms of tenants who may not be aware of their rights when signing a fixed-term lease that does not follow the standard form. There are significant gaps in the residential tenancy program when it comes to fixed-term leases. There are very clear ways to address those, and the government is not taking those steps to address those when they can and they should. Thank you.
Thank you again. Our sincere thanks to all those who've appeared today as witnesses. You are now free to leave. For committee members, I would note the letter that was received from the Department of Opportunities and Social Development on behalf of the Nova Scotia Advisory Council on the status of women. This was regarding moving the topic of moving toward epidemic level response to intimate partner violence. I don't know if there is any discussion at this hour, so that's just noted. Our next meeting will be on June 3rd, and the topic will be expanding cellular infrastructure. With that, this meeting is adjourned.